The rain fell in sheets across the downtown streets, turning the sidewalks into rivers of grime and forgotten dreams. Robert Hamblin stood beneath the flickering neon sign of a rundown diner, his designer suit replaced by threadbare jeans and a jacket that smelled of mothballs and someone else's life. His hands, usually manicured and soft, were now deliberately dirted, calluses drawn on with makeup that felt foreign against his skin. He caught his reflection in the diner's grease-stained window and barely recognized himself. Good. That was the point. For 3 years, Robert had ruled the corporate world from a glass tower that touched the clouds. Hamblin Industries, his empire of tech innovation and ruthless business decisions, had made him a billionaire before 30. But wealth had built walls, not bridges. Everyone wanted something from him. Everyone wore a mask. Just yesterday, Francis T. Sandlin, his biggest rival, had smiled to his face while attempting a hostile takeover behind his back. His own board members laughed at his jokes not because they were funny, but because he signed their paychecks. Even the women who pursued him saw dollar signs, not the man beneath. So tonight, Robert wore a different mask, one of poverty, of invisibility. The bell above the diner door chimed as he pushed inside, and the warmth hit him like a memory he'd forgotten. The scent of coffee and bacon grease mingled with the low hum of conversations. Working-class people filled the worn booths, nurses coming off night shifts, construction workers grabbing breakfast before dawn, students hunched over textbooks they couldn't afford. Real people. Living real lives. Sit anywhere, Han, called a voice that carried both exhaustion and kindness. Robert turned toward the sound and felt his carefully constructed plan stumble. She stood behind the counter, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her uniform wrinkled from a long shift. But it was her eyes, warm brown and genuinely curious, that caught him completely off guard. Her name tag read Helen Brown. She smiled at him. Not the calculated smile he received at galas and boardrooms. A real smile, offered to a stranger she thought had nothing. Coffee? Helen asked, already reaching for a pot. Robert nodded, not trusting his voice. He slid into a corner booth, suddenly aware that this experiment might reveal more than he'd bargained for. Helen poured his coffee with practiced grace, and their fingers brushed accidentally. She pulled back quickly, apologizing, but Robert felt the contact like electricity. When was the last time someone had touched him without wanting something? First time here? Helen asked, her voice gentle, as if she understood what it meant to be lost. Yeah, Robert managed, his throat tight. First time. She studied him for a moment with those perceptive eyes, and Robert wondered if she could see through his disguise, past the worn clothes to the man who owned 3 homes and had never known hunger. Well, Helen said softly, setting down a menu, you picked a good night. Mary, that's the owner, she always says we're family here. Nobody leaves hungry, and nobody leaves alone. From across the diner, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, Mary L. Laurie, waved at him with a warm smile. Robert's chest tightened unexpectedly. Family. When was the last time that word had meant anything real to him? Helen returned with a plate of food Robert hadn't ordered, scrambled eggs, toast, and hash browns that smelled like heaven. I didn't, Robert started. On the house, Helen interrupted gently. You look like you could use a warm meal. Her eyes held no pity, only understanding. I've been there. Robert stared at the plate, emotion catching in his throat. In his world, a free meal cost thousands, elaborate dinners where every bite came with expectations and strings attached. This simple gesture, given freely to someone she thought couldn't afford it, meant more than she could possibly know. Thank you, he whispered. As Helen moved to serve other customers, Robert watched her. She laughed with a tired construction worker, slipped an extra piece of pie to a struggling student, and listened, really listened, when an elderly man talked about his late wife. She gave her time, her attention, her heart to people who couldn't pay her back. She was beautiful in a way his penthouse dates never were. Real. Unguarded. Kind. That's Helen, said a gruff voice. Robert looked up to find a weathered man sliding into the opposite booth. His clothes were genuinely tattered, his face lined by hard living. Name's Kevin Meyer. You're new to the streets. Robert hesitated, then nodded. Kevin didn't know he was lying. Helen's good people, Kevin continued, warming his hands around a coffee cup Helen had already filled. Known her 2 years. Never once treated me like I was invisible. Most people look right through folks like us. Like us, Robert repeated quietly. For the first time in his life, he was experiencing invisibility. Earlier, he'd walked past his own company headquarters and the security guard, who saw him every day, had told him to move along. The irony was brutal. You got a place to stay? Kevin asked, genuine concern in his weathered face. Not really, Robert admitted, the lie feeling heavier now. Kevin pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. There's a shelter on 5th. They're good people. Tell them Kevin sent you. Robert stared at the paper, his eyes burning. This man, who had nothing, was trying to help him. No agenda. No angle. Just human kindness. Before he could respond, the diner door burst open. A well-dressed woman stumbled in, her designer purse clutched tight, her mascara running. Jean Whitfield, Robert recognized her vaguely from society pages. But here, now, she looked desperate. Please, Jean gasped, approaching the counter where Helen stood. My car broke down. My phone's dead. I just need to call someone. Of course, Helen said immediately, handing over the diner's phone. Take your time. But as Jean made her call, Sean Kelly, a regular customer and Helen's protective friend, muttered loud enough for others to hear, bet she doesn't even tip. Rich people never do. Jean's face flushed red. She ended her call quickly, threw a $20 bill on the counter, far more than a phone call warranted, and rushed out without waiting for change. Robert watched the whole scene, his mind racing. The judgment. The assumptions. The walls between people that money built. See? Kevin said quietly. Money makes people cruel. Makes them forget we're all human. But Robert had seen something else. He'd seen Jean's hurt, her embarrassment. She wasn't cruel. She was just separated. Like he had been. Helen appeared at their table, refilling coffees. You okay? She asked Robert, her hand briefly touching his shoulder. The gesture was innocent, comforting, but it sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the coffee. Yeah, Robert said, meeting her eyes. I think I'm starting to be. That night, Robert didn't return to his penthouse. Instead, following Kevin's advice, he went to the shelter. He needed to understand. Really understand. The shelter was clean but crowded. Families huddled together. Veterans with haunted eyes. People who'd worked hard their whole lives until one catastrophe had broken them. As Robert lay on a thin cot, surrounded by the sounds of people who'd lost everything, a realization crystallized. He hadn't been living. He'd been existing in a golden cage, surrounded by people who loved his money but not him. He thought of Helen's smile. Her kindness. The way she'd touched his shoulder like he mattered. Tomorrow, he'd return to the diner. Not as Robert Hamblin, billionaire. But as the man he was pretending to be, the man who was discovering what it meant to be truly human. What he didn't know was that tomorrow would change everything. Robert returned to the diner every day for a week. Each morning, he'd wake at the shelter, help Kevin and others organize donated clothes, then make his way to the small restaurant that had become his anchor. And each day, Helen's smile felt like sunrise. The usual, she'd ask, and the fact that he had a usual, that someone remembered him, made his chest ache. They talked. Real conversations. Helen told him about her dreams of opening a community center someday, a place where people could learn skills, find jobs, rebuild their lives. Her eyes lit up when she spoke about it, and Robert found himself memorizing every expression, every gesture. "What about you?" Helen asked one afternoon during her break, sliding into the booth across from him. "What do you dream about?" Robert looked at her, really looked at her. In his real life, women asked him about his portfolio, his properties, his plans for expansion. No one had ever asked about his dreams. "I dream about mattering," he said quietly, surprised by his own honesty. "Really mattering to someone. Not for what I can give them, but for who I am." Helen's hand crossed the table, covering his. "You matter, Robert. Don't let anyone make you believe you don't." She thought his name was Robert Johnson, the fake surname he'd given. She didn't know she was holding the hand of a man who could buy this entire block without blinking. The guilt was starting to eat at him. But then Francis T. Sandlin walked into the diner. Robert's blood ran cold. Francis was his business rival, the man currently trying to destroy Hamblin Industries through corporate warfare. If Francis recognized him. But Francis's eyes swept right past Robert without a flicker of recognition. To him, Robert in shabby clothes was invisible. Beneath notice. Francis sat at the counter, snapping his fingers impatiently at Helen. "Coffee. Black. And make it quick. I have actual important places to be." Robert watched Helen's jaw tighten, but she poured the coffee with the same grace she showed everyone. "Anything else?" she asked politely. "This place is a dump," Francis said loudly, checking his phone. "Don't you people have standards?" Several customers looked up, offended. Mary L. Laurie, the owner, emerged from the kitchen, her expression stern. "Sir, we treat everyone with respect here. I'll ask you to do the same." Francis laughed coldly. "Respect? I'm the customer. I could buy this place and turn it into a parking lot. Show some gratitude." Something snapped in Robert. He stood, moving toward the counter before he could think it through. "Apologize," Robert said quietly. Francis finally looked at him, his lip curling with disgust. "Excuse me? Who the hell are you?" "Someone who knows you should apologize to these good people." Francis stood, stepping close. "Listen, homeless trash, why don't you?" Robert moved faster, his hand gripping Francis's wrist with the strength of someone who'd boxed at Harvard, not begged on streets. Francis's eyes widened in shock. "Apologize," Robert repeated, his voice steel. For a moment, Francis looked ready to fight. Then he saw something in Robert's eyes, something familiar he couldn't quite place, and uncertainty flickered across his face. "Whatever," Francis muttered, pulling away. He threw money on the counter and stormed out. The diner erupted in quiet applause. Kevin clapped Robert on the back. Mary brought him free pie. But Robert only saw Helen, staring at him with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "That was brave," she said softly. "And a little scary. There's more to you than meets the eye, Robert Johnson." Her words felt like a question and an accusation. Robert's secret suddenly felt heavier than ever. That night, as he walked Helen to her bus stop after her shift, she surprised him by taking his hand. "Thank you," she said. "For today. For every day this week. You've reminded me why I do what I do, why kindness matters." Robert looked at their intertwined fingers. "Helen, I know this is crazy," she interrupted, her cheeks flushing. "We barely know each other. But I feel like I've known you forever. Like you see me. The real me." Robert's heart hammered. "I do see you. You're the most real person I've ever met." She stepped closer, and Robert knew he should pull away, should tell her the truth. But when she rose on her toes and kissed him softly, every rational thought dissolved. The kiss was gentle, tentative, perfect. It tasted like hope and honesty, things Robert had forgotten existed. When they parted, Helen smiled shyly. I've wanted to do that all week. Me too, Robert whispered. But as her bus pulled away and she waved goodbye, reality crashed back. He was living a lie. Every moment with her was built on deception. What happened when she learned the truth? Everything shattered on a rainy Thursday. Robert had been living his double life for 3 weeks. By day, he was the homeless man Helen had fallen for. By night, he secretly met with Frederick Lewis, his loyal assistant, to ensure Hamblin Industries didn't collapse in his absence. "Sir, you need to come back," Frederick pleaded during one of their midnight meetings in a parking garage. "Francis T. Sandlin is making moves. The board is getting nervous. Your company needs you." "One more week," Robert insisted. "I need one more week." But he wasn't thinking about his company. He was thinking about Helen, about the way she laughed, the way she fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves, the way she made him feel alive. He was in love with her. Truly, deeply, impossibly in love. And she loved someone who didn't exist. The next day, Robert arrived at the diner to find Jean Whitfield there again. But this time, she wasn't alone. She sat in a booth with Helen, both women crying. Robert froze. "I lost everything," Jean was saying, her voice broken. "My husband left me. Took everything in the divorce. The house, the money, even my friends. They were all his friends. I have nothing." Helen held Jean's hands. "You have yourself. That's something." "I treated people so badly," Jean sobbed. "I was so arrogant. So blind. And now I'm on the other side, and I understand. God, I understand everything." Robert watched, his chest tight, as Helen, who had every reason to turn Jean away, instead offered compassion. She gave Jean a job application for the diner, told her about resources, treated her like family. This was who Helen was. This was real love, not the transactional affection Robert had known, but genuine care for another human being. He had to tell her the truth. That evening, Robert asked Helen to meet him after her shift at the small park near the diner. His heart pounded as he rehearsed the words. She'd be angry. She'd feel betrayed. But maybe she'd understand. "You sounded serious on the phone," Helen said, appearing in the lamplight. She looked beautiful and concerned. "Is everything okay?" "Helen, I need to tell you something. About who I really am." "Robert Johnson," called a voice. Robert turned to see a police officer approaching. Confusion flooded him. "You need to come with me, sir," the officer said firmly. "What? Why?" "Francis T. Sandlin filed a complaint. Says you assaulted him at a diner last week. We need to take you in." Helen's face went pale. "That's not what happened. Francis was harassing people. Robert was defending us." But the officer was already reaching for handcuffs. "You can explain at the station, sir." As Robert was being led away, he saw Francis T. Sandlin standing across the street, watching with a cruel smile. Somehow, Francis must have figured out who he was. This was revenge, corporate warfare taken personal. "Helen." Robert called out. "I need to tell you." "I'll get you help," she shouted back, tears streaming down her face. "I'll find a lawyer. I'll fix this." She thought he was helpless. She thought he needed saving. Robert sat in the holding cell, his mind racing. He could end this with one phone call. He could have his lawyers descend like angels and make everything disappear. He could reveal who he really was. But then Helen would know he'd lied. She'd know every moment they'd shared was based on deception. Hours passed. Then Frederick Lewis appeared, his face grim. "Sir, we have a serious problem. Francis has leaked to the press that Robert Hamblin has gone missing. Your stock is plummeting. The board is calling for an emergency meeting." If you don't appear tomorrow, they're voting you out. Robert closed his eyes. His company, his life's work, was about to be destroyed. And there's something else, Frederick continued hesitantly. Helen Brown. I did some research like you asked. Sir, her community center dream. She's been saving for 5 years. She has almost $50,000 in donations and personal savings. It's everything she has. Why does that matter? Robert asked, though dread was already pooling in his stomach. Because Francis discovered your connection to her. He's targeting her next. He's planning to buy the property she was hoping to lease, just to hurt you. She'll lose everything. Robert's world tilted. His deception, his selfish desire to experience authenticity, was about to destroy the most genuine person he'd ever known. He had to choose, his company or her dream. His identity or her trust. The truth or the lie. For the first time in his life, Robert Hamblin didn't know what to do. Robert made his choice in the cold darkness of that cell. Frederick, he said quietly, I need you to do exactly as I say. By dawn, Robert was released. Francis's charges mysteriously dropped. Robert knew Francis had only filed them to force his hand, to make him reveal himself. The game was psychological, not legal. But Robert wasn't playing Francis's game anymore. He went straight to the diner. Helen was there, exhausted from staying up all night trying to find him help. When she saw him, she ran into his arms. Thank God, she whispered against his chest. I was so worried. I called everyone I knew, tried to find legal aid. Helen, stop. Robert pulled back, taking her hands. You don't need to save me. I need to tell you the truth. All of it. Her eyes widened with concern. What do you mean? Before Robert could answer, Mary L. Laurie called out from the kitchen. Helen. There's someone here to see you. A well-dressed lawyer entered the diner, carrying documents. Ms. Brown. I'm here on behalf of an anonymous donor. They've purchased the property on 8th Street, the one you were hoping to lease for your community center. They'd like to donate it to you. Free and clear. Helen's face went white. What? I don't. I can't accept that. Who would? She turned to Robert, and in her eyes, he saw the moment she began to understand. Robert, she whispered. What did you do? Can we talk? He asked quietly. Somewhere private. They walked to the small park where they'd first kissed. Robert's hands shook as he pulled out his real wallet, his real ID. Robert Hamblin. CEO. Billionaire. I lied to you, he said, his voice breaking. My name is Robert Hamblin. I own Hamblin Industries. I'm wealthy. Very wealthy. 3 weeks ago, I disguised myself as homeless because I wanted to know what it felt like to be treated like a person instead of a bank account. Helen stared at the ID, then at him, her face cycling through shock, confusion, and hurt. You've been lying to me this whole time. Her voice trembled. Every conversation, every moment, it was all fake. No. Robert stepped forward, but she stepped back. Helen, my feelings for you are real. You're the most real thing that's ever happened to me. I fell in love with you. You fell in love with me while pretending to be someone else. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I fell in love with Robert Johnson, a man struggling to survive. Not some billionaire playing dress-up with people's lives. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Robert said, his own tears falling now. But I need you to know, you changed me. You showed me what truly matters. Kindness. Compassion. Humanity. Things I'd forgotten existed. And the building? Helen's voice was cold now. You think you can buy my forgiveness? No. The building is yours whether you forgive me or not. Your dream matters, Helen. It should exist in this world. Helen looked at him for a long moment, and Robert saw his future hanging in the balance. "I need time," she finally said. "I need to think. Please, just leave me alone." She walked away, and Robert let her go. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. But he wasn't done fighting. Robert went to his office for the first time in 3 weeks. The board was in emergency session, Francis T. Sandlin waiting like a vulture to pick apart the company. "Gentlemen," Robert said, striding into the boardroom in his proper suit, his proper life. "I'm back." The room erupted. Francis's face went purple with rage. "Where have you been?" demanded one board member. "Learning," Robert said simply. "Learning what this company should actually stand for." He presented his new vision. Hamblin Industries would redirect 30% of profits to community development. They'd create job training programs, affordable housing, support for the homeless. They'd use their wealth to build bridges, not walls. "You're insane," Francis spat. "Shareholders will revolt." "Then let them," Robert said calmly. "I'd rather have a company that matters than one that just makes money." The vote was close. But Robert won. Barely. As Francis stormed out, he hissed, "You'll regret this. That girl has made you weak." "No," Robert said quietly. "She's made me strong enough to be the man I should have been all along." Now he just had to prove it to Helen. 1 week passed. The longest week of Robert's life. He didn't contact Helen, respecting her need for space. Instead, he threw himself into action. He visited the shelter where he'd stayed, not as a disguised billionaire but as himself, and funded its complete renovation. He met with Kevin Meyer and dozens of others he'd met, offering job training, housing assistance, genuine help. He partnered with Jean Whitfield, who'd found her own strength through loss, to create programs for people rebuilding their lives after divorce or financial catastrophe. And he thought about Helen. Every moment of every day. Meanwhile, Helen was struggling. She'd opened the building Robert had given her, started organizing her community center, but her heart felt hollow. She was angry at Robert for lying. But she also couldn't stop thinking about the man she'd fallen in love with. Was he even real? Or had it all been an act? Laurie finally sat her down one evening after the diner closed. "Child," the older woman said gently, "you're miserable. Talk to me." Helen's composure crumbled. "I don't know who he really is, Mary. Was any of it real? I've watched that boy, and yes, billionaire or not, he's still a boy trying to figure out life, come in here every day for 3 weeks. I saw how he looked at you. That wasn't fake. But he lied." "He did," Mary agreed. "And that was wrong. But ask yourself, why did he lie? Was it to hurt you? Or was it because he was so starved for genuine connection that he made a foolish, desperate choice?" Helen wiped her tears. "I don't know if I can trust him again." "Then don't trust his words," Mary said wisely. "Trust his actions. What has he done since the truth came out?" Helen thought about it. The building he'd given her. The programs she'd heard about him funding. The way he'd respected her space instead of using his money or power to force a conversation. "Judge him by what he does now," Mary continued, "not by what he did when he was lost. We all deserve the chance to be better than our worst mistakes." That night, Helen made a decision. She found Robert at the newly renovated shelter, serving food to the people he'd once pretended to be. He was in jeans and a simple shirt, no designer labels, and he was laughing with Kevin about something. He looked up and saw her. The joy and fear that crossed his face were so raw, so real, that Helen's last doubts evaporated. "Helen," he breathed, walking toward her. "I didn't expect." "Robert Hamblin," she interrupted, and he flinched at his real name. "I have some things to say to you." "Okay." He stood still, waiting, letting her control the moment. "You lied to me. You deceived me. You made me fall in love with someone who didn't exist. I know. I'm so. But, Helen continued, stepping closer, I've been watching what you've done this week. The shelter. The programs. The way you're using your wealth to actually help people. And I realized something. She took his hand, the same way she had when she thought he was homeless. Robert Johnson, the man I fell in love with, he was real. He was the truest version of you. Not the billionaire in the tower. Not the CEO. The man who sat in my diner and saw people as people. That man was real, and he's still in there. Robert's eyes filled with tears. I want to be that man. I want to be worthy of you. Then be him, Helen said simply. Be the man who stands up for others. Who uses his privilege to lift people up. Who loves genuinely and lives authentically. I will, Robert promised. I swear I will. Helen, I love you. Not because you're kind or beautiful or perfect, but because you see the best in people, even in me. I love you too, Helen whispered. Both versions of you. The broken billionaire and the disguised homeless man. Because they're both just you. They kissed, they're in the shelter surrounded by people who'd lost everything and were finding hope again. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely real. Kevin whistled from across the room. About time. They laughed, breaking apart but not letting go of each other's hands. So what now? Helen asked. Now, Robert said, we build your community center together. We help people together. We live together, not in my penthouse, but in the real world, with real people. And your company? I'm restructuring everything. Hamblin Industries is going to stand for something more than profit. I'm going to use my resources to make actual change. Helen smiled. That's a good dream, Robert Hamblin. Not as good as mine, he said softly. What's that? To spend the rest of my life earning your trust. And maybe, someday, earning the right to call you Helen Hamblin. She blushed, her eyes sparkling. That's a very good dream. 3 months later, Helen's community center opened. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was attended by everyone. Kevin Meyer in new clothes and a new job, Jean Whitfield who now ran support groups for divorced women, Sean Kelly who'd become the center's security guard, and Mary L. Laurie who provided cooking classes. Francis T. Sandlin had tried to sabotage the opening, but his own board had voted him out when they learned about his tactics. Karma, Robert thought, had a sense of humor. As Helen gave her speech about second chances and the power of community, Robert stood in the back, watching. Frederick Lewis appeared beside him. You gave up a lot for this, sir, Frederick said quietly. No, Robert corrected, watching Helen's face glow with purpose and joy. I gained everything. That evening, as they walked through the city together, the billionaire and the waitress who'd saved each other, Helen asked, do you ever regret it? The disguise? The lie? Robert thought about it honestly. I regret hurting you. But I don't regret what it taught me. Sometimes we have to lose everything to find out what really matters. And what matters? Helen asked, though she was smiling. This, Robert said, pulling her close. You. Us. Making the world a little better than we found it. That matters. They kissed under the streetlight, and Robert Hamblin, who'd once had everything and nothing, knew he was finally, truly home. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of transformation, redemption, and authentic love. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful stories that inspire and uplift. What lesson resonated most with you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the genuine connections we make and the lives we touch. See you in the next story.